Hey there, welcome to PopNerdery, the show that is nerdier than humming the animated X-Men show theme song during lovemaking. This is a place where you're allowed to have an opinion on anything in pop culture, but you got to have more than just a little bit to say. We're going to pick out a couple of the headlines that have had us talking since the last time we did an episode. We're going to do a quick deep dive into a book this time.
Oh, shit.
And then we're going to give you a couple of pop culture recommendations. If you are this is the first time you're joining us, welcome. I am not your host, Brent. This is Dave filling in. And I am joined by my good friend, Topher.
Hey, Dave.
How you doing, Toph?
I'm doing good. I'm excited we're going to talk about books. I'm glad that my dreams for this podcast are finally starting to come true.
Absolutely. And in case you guys didn't know, Topher is my favorite rapper's favorite blogger.
That is true. And literary critic. Your favorite rapper's favorite literary critic.
And I am the Magneto of podcasting.
All those things. See, this is what happens when we don't have Brent here. We just start assigning ourselves titles and shit, and it's already, we're 30 seconds in. We're already off the rails here.
I love it. Topher, tell people where they can find the show.
Well, I'm going to tell them. You got a couple different opportunities to get more of our words in your eye holes and noises in your ear holes. You can follow us on Twitter at PopNerdery, PopNerdery. Comment on things as they happen. We mostly still are mad at George Lucas, usually for things that aren't even his fault. Like, for instance, when the Fed moves the interest rate, we still yell at George Lucas.
It's his fault, though. I really do think.
There's a convoluted theory, and I'll talk all about it in my own podcast that's called Why'd You Do That to Me, George?
We should have a spin-off podcast in which we just talk about all the problems in the world. Like, hey, George, Syria's in the middle of a 5-year-long civil war. Why'd you do that to me, George?
What? Why haven't you done more to increase peacekeeping efforts in that region?
George.
There are 3 ways to listen to the show. Just keep shouting George. I have to dig us out of this rat hole. I'm going to do it. 3 ways to listen to the show. The first is in the iTunes. Jump over to the podcast section, open up that search box, type Pop Nerdery. You can find us. You can subscribe. You can rate and review. Say nice things. We'll love you forever. And sometimes lucky people get sent gift packages. They don't, but, think that. The second way is on the website, popnerdery.com. We archive all the episodes there, chit-chat amongst ourselves, and I make nice cover images that I'd like for you to see. Put those in your eye holes.
Oh, yeah.
The third is to construct an elaborate underneath third dimension, rig up a string of lights, and spell out, Dave, I miss you, at which point Dave will come to your house and podcast over your shoulder.
I do. That's how I get to everybody in this third way. Right. That's how I get to everybody is through the upside down.
Through the upside down? It's the only way to travel, quite frankly. Otherwise, you would have so many frequent flyer miles.
I totally agree. All right, Topher, we are going to talk about a couple of news items since the last time we were here. And then we're going to talk about a recommendation that we got people up on a couple episodes back, Seveneves by Neal Stephenson. You read it a long time ago, recommended it to me. I read it. We recommended it to Brent. He has not done it. So in Brent's absence, we're going to spoil the fuck out of that book.
Yeah, he's either going to have to read it or not listen to this episode. I don't know which one.
Absolutely. So the first thing that happened when we were gone that I want to talk about a little bit is Suicide Squad came out. Apparently, quite a few people went to see it. I'd like to say that I have some sort of a protest against Warner Brothers, and that's why I'm not seeing this movie. But I really just wasn't all that motivated to go to it. It got terrible reviews, slightly better reviews than Batman Superman, but Batman Superman wronged me in a
personally
specific ways. So I didn't really have any motivation to go see it. I think had there not been a Hot Topic Joker in it, I might have been a little bit more excited, but there was one of those. So Suicide Squad is in this place right now where it is kind of like Batman Superman, where it's in this limbo area between success and failure, right? Financially, it made some money, right? Yeah. And because it was released when it was released in, I believe in late July, early August. It was released in early August. It set some box office records for early August. And there's kind of a built-in audience for this sort of thing. So it's going to make like a base amount of dollars. Yes. And critically, this thing got murdered. I didn't really read one positive review. I think Rotten Tomatoes is somewhere in the 30s in terms of the overall rating of this movie. so it's kind of in this limbo spot where it made some money, but it didn't make as much money as it could have. It dropped about 67% from week 1 to week 2 in the box office. The same as Batman Superman did. So it had bad word of mouth and bad, critical reviews. And DC is now in this place where they pretty much have to hit with Wonder Woman and Justice League next year. Otherwise, they're just going to continue the same thing of it will make a lot of money on the first weekend, and after that, people will be sad and kind of angry that they, saw it.
Paid money for it.
Do you ever see a time where people just decide not to show up at all?
I'm confused. Have you ever knowingly paid money for a movie you knew was going to be bad?
I paid for Batman Superman, so yep.
Okay.
I did. But that movie had Batman in the title, so I was kind of stuck. I almost
contractually obligated to see it.
Yeah. I run this podcast, and we talk about Batman on it quite frequently. Right. And when people ask me what I want to be when I grow up, the answer is typically Batman.
Yes.
So I felt like I had to go see that one. But no, typically when I hear a movie is bad, I usually try not to pay money to go see it.
And that's why I'm so confused as to the people who apparently just went to hate watch it, which I've hate watched a lot of things, but I've never paid opening weekend movie theater Thursday night, Friday night, Saturday night prices to do so.
Yeah. And honestly, there's a petition by DC fanboys on what is it? The change.org.
Change.org.
To get Rotten Tomatoes and Metacritic to stop rating these movies so badly. And I don't know if people understand how those websites work. They
don't understand how those work at all.
All they do is they take the ratings from other publications and they put it together in an overall percentage.
That's all they're doing. They're not writing the reviews themselves.
Rotten Tomatoes does not have an agenda to ruin DC films.
No, DC does that all on its own.
I know. I could argue that Warner Brothers has an obligation to ruin those films.
That might be the better direction it's pointed. There's nothing good about this movie. It made a lot of money, which means they're almost going to guarantee to make a second one, which is more of a thing I don't want, as opposed to giving me something that I could be interested in. So
the good news from here is that we are turning the page from the Zack Snyderverse, primarily the Zack Snyderverse, to the Jeff Johns-verse, I guess. Right. Yeah. Which I don't know if it's going to make everything great, but it should be better.
It appeals to me more, at the very least. But
so the next two movies to come out will be Wonder Woman and Justice League. They both have Jeff Johns as credited as a co-writer and a producer.
Yep.
I feel like that has to make things better.
I'm excited for Wonder Woman. Justice League is... I want to be excited for it, but Hot Topic Aquaman isn't working for me.
I actually don't mind the Aquaman. I think that he kind of looks like the animated series Aquaman if he were not an old white fella. Not if he weren't the king from Little Mermaid, which is what the animated series Aquaman kind of look like.
Basically. So, but honestly, if that's the worst crime it commits, then I'll be thrilled about Justice League. So
yeah. It does. The Justice League trailer from Comic-Con did kind of look like Ocean's Wayne kind of thing.
And I'm fine with that. So okay,
yeah, I'll take that. I like Ocean's 11. I like Bruce.
It's a heist movie, I guess now. Which honestly, that's something.
And I'm already foreseeing the problem that one runs into is it's going to have a CGI villain yet again.
Of course it will.
It would be great if the stakes were slightly smaller, or you had a villain that was smart. Not just a guy that destroys buildings and cities.
Just smash buildings seem to be his only machinations.
Anyway, moving on to something where hopefully it does have a slightly more, satisfying story. They did some reshoots, and we got a second trailer during the Olympics for Rogue One while we were gone. Yes. And there was one Anakin Tiberius Skywalker Darth Vader was in the fucking trailer, which...
Or at least the back of his head was.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm going to assume that the front of his head is also going to be in the movie.
Right.
But yeah, I'm excited for more Darth Vader.
I think I have reached the same place I did with The Force Awakens, where I have maybe one more trailer in me, and then I'm going to stop watching them. I'm excited for the movie. I'm already in. Tickets purchased. And I enjoyed the hell out of Force Awakens. by not deep diving it before I went in.
The coolest part about this trailer is the very first shot where they show you, it's like a spaceport, right? And it looks like a real tangible world, even though I guarantee you 90% of that is CGI.
Sure.
It doesn't feel like blue screen prequel shit.
It's not oddly oversaturated in all the wrong ways.
Yeah, the whole movie feels tangible.
Yes.
There was another trailer, international trailer, where we learned that it was Jyn Erso, or Felicity Jones's father, that stole the Death Star plans, and that's how we have to get them.
That's a good thing.
Yeah, and I think that it gives you some stakes. You know, we're going to be dealing with fathers and fathers and daughters, and I feel like Star Wars is strongest when it has like a family connection to lean on.
Definitely.
That's why the Skywalker story works. We had more AT-ATs. We had a little bit more of Simon Pegg, droid guy.
Big fan.
Yeah. Anything else about that trailer before we move on?
No, like I said, it felt really satisfying to the point where I might watch one more just to see a little bit more of that world before we actually get it. But aside from that, like this was the opposite, literally, of the Suicide Squad trailers, where after I saw that first one, I was like, I don't want anything to do with this movie. Rogue One was the complete opposite, where I was like, yep, sold, ticket sold, I'm into this.
I agree. And I also like every time we get another look at Ben Mendelsohn, the villain in this movie, I'm more and more intrigued.
Yep.
I want a little bit of story. I hope he doesn't die at the end, so maybe we can get a couple of stories.
I'd go for two of those.
I'd like for him to show up in the fucking Han Solo movie. Like, that would be cool.
Shit, I'd buy that for $1.
Yeah. Another thing that came out, the Spider-Man movie, Spider-Man Homecoming, that is coming out, the high school Spidey movie. We're going to see Tom Holland again as Spider-Man, and we're going to see, I don't know who this person is, but Disney Channel celebrity Zendaya as Mary Jane. So that was confirmed, that we're going to get Mary Jane Watson. The internet kind of freaked out because she is not a white person with red hair. But the internet typically does that, even though we know that we live in a slightly more diverse world than when these comics were written.
Just barely.
Just barely. So I think that bringing Mary Jane in during the high school years fits with the canon. And from everything I read, this girl's got the attitude to pull that off, because that's a difficult role to pull off. And, I don't think they've really done it well on screen yet, because Kirsten Dunst she just played Kirsten Dunst on screen.
They haven't done any Spider-Man well on screen yet, so maybe I'll hold my breath and see if
Spider-Man 2?
No.
Spider-Man 2? I love Spider-Man 2.
I mean, of all of them, it's the one I dislike the least, I guess.
Yeah, I guess. There are some very cringeworthy moments in all of the Spider-Man.
Yeah.
Spider-Man?
Spider-Man's, two Z's at the end. Spider-Man's.
All right, and since we're trying this new thing where we don't do news for 45 minutes, the last thing we're going to talk about is there's a Batman 66 animated movie coming out, and it has the voice of Adam West and the voice of Burt Ward as Batman and Robin.
Done.
I feel
sign
like
me up. Finished.
They could make 1,000 of these.
I don't know why they haven't, honestly. That's one of the, when I saw this, I was like, how have they not done this 10 times already?
Like, how come we didn't have this idea years ago?
I have no idea.
It could have been, they could honestly make this into an Adult Swim series.
Yes. They could have halfway rescued the franchise after Batman and Robin if the next thing they'd put out was this animated movie.
Like a Space Ghosty kind of version of this.
I'd watch that too.
Oh my goodness.
See. Yep. I'm in. Put it in my eye holes.
And I think I don't know what Burt Ward's been up to for a little while, but Adam West has been doing voiceover work forever.
Yeah. He's been comfortable with it.
Yeah. I think that I'm totally down for this. And after I feel like you and I have to talk a little bit about our disappointment in the Killing Joke adaptation. Yeah. I think we kind of talked about this off air once.
Yeah.
But I think after that, this would be a nice way to kind of
from the Killing Joke, it has nowhere to go but up. So yeah, hopefully.
I think that Killing Joke adaptation has the end of it from the point where the Killing Joke story actually starts until the end, from about, I don't know, 38, 39, 40 minutes, whatever, into the movie until the end, I think it's great because it's the Killing Joke. The stuff that they added about Batgirl in the beginning to kind of flesh it out, it was fine. And then they I don't know how many times we have to talk about on model, off model. But Batman and Barbara have never had a sexual relationship. What are you doing?
No, it's so bad.
Just don't do it. So if you're going to watch that movie, if you're going to spend money on it, just start it at, about halfway through.
That's literally what I did. You watched it and brought back a review, and I watched it that way, where I literally just skipped until I recognized something from the book and watched it, and I was like, that was fine. And then I went back and watched the first half of it, and I was like, this is a crime against canon.
Yeah, it was good. It was good. The second half.
The second half.
The only part in the second half that was kind of weird was Mark Hamill's Joker did a musical number in the middle of it.
Yeah, that was strange.
But you know what? He's fucking Mark Hamill. He gets to do what he wants.
I very rarely complain about when that dude does anything as the Joker, so I'm going to just chalk that up as they were feeling a little loopy, hey, full range of motion and sound, so let's have him.
Hey, this entire movie is real sad, pretty dour, so let's let Mark Hamill do some fun stuff.
Which, I'm fine with that. Of all the crimes that movie committed, that was the one that I was least instead I was just I actually went and got my copy, and I was like, did I forget where he did a song and dance number? I was like, it's been a while since I read this, but I don't think this is part of the story.
Yeah, did he actually sing that song? Because you know what? I might accept it if Mark Hamill says it happened.
Yeah, no, truly, if he's like, no, you don't understand. Mark Hamill, am telling you that this is canon. I'd be like, you're right, Mark. I apologize. Sorry, I didn't mean to bring it up. My fault.
All right. Well, killing jokes aside, we are going to move on to our B segment. The B segment, we are going to talk a little bit about Seveneves right after the break.
Today's show is brought to you by Amazon. Go to popnerdery.com/Amazon, shop as you normally would, get the same Amazon you know and love while you get to support Pop Nerdery.
So, Toph, next time you recommend a giant coffee table book about the Coen brothers, I can go to popnerdery.com/Amazon?
And buy 2 copies. Pop Nerdery is part of the Amazon Associates program. It means you get the same selection and low prices of Amazon you know and love. If you're a Prime member, you get the exact same 2-day shipping that you already compulsively buy things when you're shopping, and you support Pop Nerdery. That's it. This is simple.
Click. Oh, sorry, Toph. I was already bookmarking popnerdery.com/Amazon.
Dave, you did something right then. But bookmark popnerdery.com/Amazon in your favorite browser today. And remember, every time you're going to Amazon to compulsively buy things, popnerdery.com/Amazon. Welcome back to Pop Nerdery. Here in the B section, we're going to snuggle on into one topic and really explore it like a young child exploring a whale carcass that's washed up on the beach. Filled with hope and blubber and whale ribs.
I love when the B segment is filled with blubber.
Blubber and whale ribs. I don't know, that might have fallen apart on me. Tonight we want to discuss Seveneves. As previously mentioned, I made this my recommendation on one of the earlier episodes after we all loved The Martian. Another hard sci-fi book that came out, I think shortly before Seveneves, I believe. But again, in that kind of taking a concept that is futuristic, extrapolating 1 or 2 items and continuing with the story while remaining mostly plausible around most of the science in the book. Seveneves is in that same thread, vein, however you want to describe it. It was published in 2015 by Neal Stephenson, noted sci-fi author. And honestly, if you're a nerd, you've already read a lot of Neal Stephenson, I'm imagining, because that shit's good. Yeah. So we are going to discuss the book in some, well, not depth, because this is only going to be about a 30-minute segment, and we don't have all night. This book is relatively large. I think it's just shy of 1,000 pages, so there's a lot to chew on. However, we are going to spoil some plot points. So if you haven't read it and you are one of the no spoilers peoples, now is a wonderful time to just jump to the end and find out what we recommend and go read it yourself. So fair warning, we're going to spoil the shit out of this for you.
Yeah, Topher and I haven't had a chance to talk about this book in depth since I read it. So he recommended it to both of us. I read it, and we were kind of saving it for a time when we would be able to kind of dig deep into it. So my first thought on kind of where we should start this is to kind of like this is what kind of sci-fi this is. Mm-hmm. This is hard sci-fi in the way that they tell you the science that they're doing. They tell you how this is plausible. The author makes it his mission to kind of flesh out all the science as he goes through the story.
He's showing his work. To put it back into elementary school terms, he's showing you the math on the page there.
Exactly. If you're talking about Star Wars, Star Trek, you're talking about soft sci-fi. This is stuff where we take for granted things that are nearly impossible in the world. Things like, I don't know, when Scotty beams you up and lightsabers happen. Those things are soft sci-fi. This is hard sci-fi where he takes – the reason why it's just shy of 1,000 pages is he takes the time to tell you, why on the first page of the book when the moon explodes, this is a bad thing. He takes the time to
discussing things like escape velocity and what the actual acceleration of various bolides in the Earth's atmosphere and what speed you need to move between an orbital plane. And this sounds, I guarantee you I'm doing a shit job of selling this. In the context of the book and the way that he describes it in the course of the plot, it's fascinating because it's no different than Doc telling you that you've got to get the DeLorean to 88 miles an hour. Extended on a couple of pages.
Yeah. And I think that my first real, dive back into hard sci-fi was The Martian. And The Martian was, does qualify as hard sci-fi because he tells you what he's doing as he's doing it and how it works to make it plausible. But this goes so much farther into the future, so much farther beyond what we are capable of today, that there's a lot more work to show. For Neal Stephenson. And I'll say he does do a good job of it. At no point does the story feel like it's not plausible. Even when at one point it jumps 5,000 years in the future, it still seems plausible. Not like it doesn't seem like total fantasy, which is what lightsabers and the Force feel like. Which
is something we both like, but this is unique in that to me, there's no suspension of disbelief when you go into a Star Wars and there's a 7-foot walking chimp who flies spaceships. You got to kind of, there's some bar of entry to that to go, okay, I accept this in this world, and either I like the story or I don't. In this, it is, to me, it becomes almost like similar to almost like a Tom Clancy kind of a novel where you take the situation as it currently is and then invent a scenario in which it all plays out within the context of current technology and then extrapolates it further.
Yeah, exactly. And I think
I have to, because we glossed over this earlier, it has maybe the easiest elevator pitch for any sci-fi book ever, in that this isn't a spoiler. The moon blows up and no one knows why, and it's in the first paragraph.
Yeah, and spoilers, but unless I miss something, they don't tell you why the moon exploded through 880 pages.
They refer to it as the agent the whole time.
Right. It's not important why the moon exploded. It just happened. It's the inciting incident to the story, they don't try to solve it because
it doesn't matter.
The problems that it caused are big enough that they have to deal with it for 1,000 pages.
Yeah, when I first finished it the first time, I kind of reflected on that exactly. Like, I really enjoy it. I love this book. But I just looked back and went, the moon exploded, and at no point did anyone ever give a shit about why. That's how compelling the set of problems that comes with that event are. That really, like you're really super focused on it for the first 5 chapters, like what happened to the moon? This is fucked up. Is it? And you're trying to get ahead of the author, and in reality, he's already left the event behind. It doesn't matter. You just have to deal with the circumstance.
And you kind of think that, solving that, in a normal story, that would kind of help you in your quest to survive it. And in this story, that's not going to happen.
No, that would be the normal A framework to which someone else would build the entire book around. Right? Was the quest to figure out what happened here, and in that way, we'll find love and adventure and all the other things you normally tack on that shit. Neal just went, nope, not important. Moving on to the next thing.
Did you ever read Armada? Armada is by Ernest Cline. He did Ready Player One.
I didn't.
It is a book that is soft sci-fi where we don't get the science behind everything, and the inciting incident is the kind of part of the solution to the problem by the time you get to the end of it. So it's the opposite way of doing this book, and I found that one far less satisfying than reading Seveneves.
Yeah, because to me, this also became something that it's one of those fascinating things that we take the moon kind of for granted. Like, it's just there, like, oh, look, the moon is full. Or if it does something weird, it's like, oh, it's the super moon. Or that's, right. When BuzzFeed writes an article about it, you spend 15 seconds thinking about the moon. In reality, if we lose the moon, we as a species are pretty fucked.
Yeah. And if
we lose any orbital body, that goes for any number of things in our, tightly packed rotation. But it puts an entire story and idea behind something that normally we just go, yeah, whatever, moon, yeah, great.
And it was very nice the way that they kind of gave you a window into the hard science behind why this is such a huge problem. They had a Neil deGrasse Tyson-esque character.
Yep. Let's just be clear, it is Neil deGrasse Tyson.
It really is. In the
At least
book,
in my head it was.
It's kind of like a Neil deGrasse Tyson mixed with a Bill Nye the Science Guy.
That's exactly how I describe it.
He's kind of casual by calling himself Doc Dubois. Doc Dubois. So he's the character kind of through which we learn the science, because that's how the general public learns about science, is through these guys, these Neil deGrasse Tysons and the Bill Nye the Science guys.
The science communicators.
Yes, exactly. He's the best thing that I saw written about him was he's a science popularizer. Which I think is the kind of the perfect title for somebody like that. But so the general way that the story is broken up is you get the first three parts, or you get three parts. The first part is the aftermath of the moon exploding, what that kind of what happens, what types of plans that we put in place in order to survive as a species, and the launching of those plans. Part two is when the world itself is kind of gone and you are left, to your own devices in space. And, Earth is no longer the sanctuary. Space is the sanctuary. How they kind of survive that. And part three is kind of crazy. They give you the payoff to this story by jumping 5,000 years in the future. And I think that's the most ambitious thing about this book, is a lot of times they would, kind of leave it at the end of part two where, listen, the Earth is gone, and, you tie up all of the strands that you have and you place a nice bow on it for a sequel. And maybe part three of this book becomes a sequel for a different author. But for Neal Stephenson, he has to tie it up and give you a story that kind of is the consequence of the choices that are made in the first two parts.
Yeah, normally you kind of get the last shot of Empire, where they're all standing at the bridge staring out, and you've seen that whole movie is a progression from point A to point B to set something else up. This skips over all of that and goes straight to the payoff and kind of the consequences thereof.
Yeah, and I think we're spoiling this now. But one of the reasons why that 5,000 years in the future is so compelling is that at the end of part two, you get the 7 survivors. It's 7 women, 7 scientists. They're not all scientists, but 7 women who are either astronomers or scientists or, Russian cosmonauts.
The former president of the United States, geneticists, roboticists.
Right. 7 brilliant women.
People.
Who are, one of them is a crazy person. Who are the 7 survivors of the planet Earth. And they, the hard sci-fi of this is that they modify their genetics in order to which each of those 7 feels like they can best survive. They have very limited resources with which to carry on the human race. They have a little bit of, frozen genetic material to try and bring the human race forward, and they tell you how they do it, and then they show you the consequences of that, that's interesting. I mean, that's super interesting. It's more ambitious than a normal book would have given you in that circumstance.
Definitely. There's one thing that I want to discuss with you, since we haven't talked about this. Jumping back to part 2, we're all in space. The Earth is trashed. It's done. Neal Stephenson wrote a character that I so despised from the jump that I had so I just recently listened to this audiobook in my car, and part of it is just a really nice effort from the voice actor who did this.
Oh yeah. Did a fantastic job.
Yeah. But the president, former president, non-president, I guess, however you want to describe her, is such a loathsome character.
Oh,
and this is something that I really struggle through because, unsurprisingly, humans are petty, jealous, selfish dipshits.
Yeah.
Which is something that in a lot of the times we see this kind of taken out. We assume that in a terrifying, tragic, truly life-threatening situation that altruism suddenly becomes the thing that humans are all about. In reality, this thing goes, humans are going to be just as petty shitheads in the end as they would be. And the survivors, who are all kind of crammed in these little, what they call arklets, these tiny space pods, hovering a large asteroid in a larger ship, decide that they could probably do better on their own and basically fuck off from the larger arc.
Yeah.
I had such a visceral reaction to that because, deep in my heart of hearts, I know that's true.
Right.
And that human beings are going to still be shit whenever, no matter what we're facing. But it's also just this is so short-sighted and all the normal reasons. I'm arguing with the audiobook as I'm driving. People honestly thought I was probably having some kind of fit because I'm shouting at my radio. I first and foremost, this is a brilliant piece of writing because it's what you normally don't get out of this, right? Normally you get the survivors band together and strive for a new future.
Yeah.
Now humans are still going to be shitbags.
Yeah, and it reminded me, and I hate to keep bringing it, parallels to other pieces of media, but it reminded me of the kind of the power struggles that you would see in Battlestar Galactica, the I don't know 2005 whatever version that is.
The reboot.
Yeah, the reboot. It reminded me of Balthazar, who's a supremely hated character for me, hateable character for me. Yeah, she is pretty bad, and then there's also the kind of the Elon Musk-ish character. I think his name is Sean, right?
Sean Probst.
Yeah, Sean Probst. He's kind of Elon Musky. He's kind of I don't know, Indiana Jonesy, I guess. I'm going to go and solve some problems on my own. So he's kind of likable, but also kind of hey, shouldn't we make these decisions together?
Yeah, there are only so many of you left of the entirety of the species.
Yeah.
Which, again, was one of those things where that's a character that I liked certainly more than Julia. But at the same time, it's just I also have fundamental problems with what you're doing here.
Well, roguishness is really cool in soft sci-fi. Han Solo is really cool in soft sci-fi. But in hard sci-fi, when everything has a cost, and we are painfully aware of that cost because we've taken 25 pages to talk about how many vitamins they have left and how they are getting water
the
from
survivor rate, the agriculture rate that these things can grow, and exactly how much food they have and all this stuff. He's hey, by the way, I'm going to go fuck off for a little while and go on an adventure. You're
right.
No, don't do that.
Yeah. And the story rewards that character by making you like him in the end because he kind of saves the day at a certain point.
Yeah, but also brutally kills him for his efforts.
Yes. But in the moment...
So once again, I was okay, oh yeah, totally. You're no, we need the propulsion. The whole idea is he goes out and gets a giant orb of frozen water that's congealed into an asteroid. They use the water as propellant to be able to shift their alignments and altitude, so this becomes an incredibly necessary thing for the survival of the human race. But at the same time, there's also, they even say, and I think he admits at some point, there's a better than zero chance that this will absolutely fail, just spectacularly, and it'll have been a huge waste of resources.
Oh yeah. And I think that the cool part is that they allow in the story, because it has such a large amount of time to tell the story in 1,000 pages, it kind of allows them to follow all of those threads all the way to the end. That you get to see the payoff to that character. Yes, he helps the mission by going rogue, but he faces personal consequences. And yes, Julia is a shithead, but she doesn't face consequences. And you know what? Sometimes in real life, people get to be shitheads and they don't face consequences.
And they win. They get to be shitheads and win. Which
they get to be one of the 7 mothers of civilization.
Yeah, and that's the next big point that I think at least in the narrative that I'm fascinated by, was this whole idea of, since they have to repopulate off of a very small population, they're obviously very attuned to the fact that they're going to have a very small selection of breeding stock for what we would become at that point.
Right.
And so Stephenson introduces the idea of allowing for minor genetic alterations. Yes. It starts out and the way it comes about in the book, I thought was brilliantly done, how it turns from a conversation around eliminating genetic birth defects, since obviously every pregnancy that takes 9 months, there's only so long that these 7 women have to, so the whole idea is that you can't have a lot of failed pregnancies. So, but then that gets turned on its head into, now we're going to allow for one genetic mutation or modification, I should say, to really distinctify all 7 of these races. And that was a part that I felt
they kind of do
satisfied.
They kind of do it in a way that is, it's kind of altruistic, right? Like what alteration would you give in order to help best, arm your offspring to survive, arm your offspring to repopulate the human race.
Yes. So
it starts out altruistic, but then you get to see the kind of consequences of it. Yeah.
And that was one thing that, or as someone, and we've discussed at length here, how we all like to dive deep into worlds that feel complete and stretch out in them and figure all this stuff out. I wanted way more. Part 3 to me felt like the shortest portion of the book. And I don't know if that's just because we were reaching a conclusion and things were naturally moving faster, but with what information we get about how the 7 races live together, to me, I wanted way more of that, how that developed and everything else, which is the shift. I mean, at some point he has to leave that 5,000 year gap behind, because otherwise this book is pages long.
Yeah.
And then no one reads it. So I understand that. But to me, I guess it's a good thing. I was a little unsatisfied as a reader going, I want to know more about races have emerged and interacted with each other. Because obviously we find out in the future that they're all pretty segregated into the way that the original Seveneves liked each other. So 4 of them got along great. 1 of them was kind of indifferent, and 2 of them didn't really like anybody.
Yeah.
Kind of self-segregated along those lines, and seem to have obviously this is 5,000 years of human society that we basically just jump into the middle of.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that if you were to say, for example, you were to make this into a movie, right?
Yeah.
The first 2 parts would work perfectly as part 1 and part 2 of a trilogy, whereas part 3 could almost stand alone as its own trilogy. Like, it was a world, because it had been set up so well, it was a world that I wanted to explore a little bit more.
And I was thinking about that. I almost think that you could put part 1 and 2 together. So you start from the explosion of the moon all the way to the split between the Arklets and the main Endurance, as they come to call it, and then make part 3 into 2 separate movies. Because as much I liked living in the space station and everything else, but like we said, this is hard science. It's stuff that we've seen before. It's Interstellar and The Martian and a lot of stuff where we've looked at space is dangerous and scary. And Seveneves does a great job of really making that real, down to just how the most minor thing can murder a bunch of people really quickly.
Yeah.
That said, we kind of felt those pressures before. So for me, I'd put part 1 and 2 into one movie, and then I want to spend time.
Honestly,
in this Earth 2.
The way that it might get done is the parts 1 and 2 get put into a credit sequence with a voiceover, and then there's a trilogy that follows.
It just right to
Yeah.
Also, every time I heard Earth 2, it made me giggle, because I was like, awesome, so none of the canon applies here. We can just do whatever the fuck we want to.
Yeah,
because Earth 2 in comic book parlance means that, we're just going to do whatever, but it's not the real thing, so we're okay here. So every time they're back on Earth 2, I was like, yes, back on Earth 2, Batman is just ripping people's heads off left and right and flinging them into the atmosphere. I fucking love it.
I did find the story of part 3, the actual plot of part 3, to be somewhat, I don't know. It wasn't as satisfying as I would have liked. It felt like they could have gone farther, or because they had jumped the 5,000 years, I felt like the story was a little bit small.
Yeah. And that's what I was saying. I felt like that section went by really quickly. And it could be just because it was the logical conclusion. 1 and 2 are pretty much just going to the halfway point.
Yeah.
On an A arc, it's we took a big gap in the middle and then had a conclusion that you recognized where everything was, but it really is a different story. It has its basis in the same universe, but there's a lot there. And I think that's the other reason I wanted to spend more time in that world, because a lot of the stuff was like, the Aedans don't like the Teklins. And that, these people didn't like each other in part 1 and 2, but like that's a hell of an extrapolation. 5,000 years later, these people still don't like each other. Like what was that all about? Tell me what that was like. And so I feel like that's why it felt maybe more shallow than what I'd wished it was.
That they made part 3 we're gonna skip 5,000 years and everything will remain pretty much the same. The players will be different, and the science parts of part 3 were super interesting, where they kind of told us like, listen, after years and years and years of breeding and genetic modification, here's what the Ivans are like, and here's what the Dynans are like. I think that was very interesting.
Yeah, exactly.
But the actual plot of the story, which is essentially every race on the planet, the 7 races, have a kind of a treaty over kind of the use of the Earth. They have spent years and years and years trying to what's the word I'm looking for? Terraform the Earth to make it livable again. So they have these treaties about what they're allowed to do, what they're not allowed to do, what they're allowed to affect or not affect on the surface in order to try and make it kind of livable again. And you start getting these hints that there may be something a little more to it, that there may be some things on the surface that, are, being hidden from the general population. And it turns out that the thing that's being hidden are there are some survivors on the planet who survived underground, and they're tied to one of the races of the Seveneves. So the third part of the story becomes kind of a race to make contact with these people and become allies with these people, so that way they can lay claim to parts of the surface. That's kind of it. That's kind of where it ends.
And it was the most kind of complete A to B arc, where it's like you find out about the newly formed population structure of the human race, and then it's like, oh, by the way, turns out survivors. Dun dun dun. Yeah. Which was still cool, and I was still very much into it, but
it's kind of like a Shyamalan twist.
A little bit. It was something that I suspected. It's one of those, I guess that's the perfect description, right? Once you figure it out, you go, oh, I see the 92 clues that were
they set up a whole ton of clues that were very, very small.
Yeah.
And he did a very nice job of laying the groundwork so that way when it happened, it didn't feel cheap.
No, not at all.
Right, but then you look back and you're like, oh, I should have caught that.
Exactly. And that's why it feels slightly unsatisfying, I suppose. I guess it's not unsatisfying. It was still good. It just was shallow. I just wanted more of it.
Yeah.
Because some of the stuff that he went into, like in the previous 2 parts, like as Earth is collapsing, people congregate in like almost the 7 wonders, like what's left, and like they're broadcasting from like Notre Dame Cathedral. As parts of the moon are literally raining down and obliterating the surface of Earth, and honestly, it's the band that plays as the Titanic goes down.
Right.
It's like, well, there's nothing else to do, so we're just going to do this. Like that was hauntingly beautiful.
Yeah.
And then suddenly, and there are a lot of those moments, like throughout part 1 and 2, and in part 3, it's really just kind of honestly, if you'd written part 3 as a separate book, I would have read it and liked it and been like, oh shit, that's crazy. That was fun. I liked that. But since it's also attached to part 1 and 2, which felt so robust and so fleshed out, it was an abrasive shift to kind of, and I think I want to circle around on that point because it's definitely meant to be, to the point where in the audiobook, it actually shifts narrator when you jump into the future.
It does.
So he means for it to be this abrupt departure from the previous part of the story.
It's almost like he wrote the first 2 parts as like the story, and he was starting to write part 3 as the epilogue, and he was like, fuck it, I'm just going to write a whole 3rd part.
Yeah, he's like, no, wait, this is awesome. I want to explore this.
You know what I mean? It's like perfect analogy for nerds. It's like in Harry Potter, right? She writes 7 books, and then she writes an epilogue where Harry's an adult.
Right.
Right? And then she can't help herself but to write this stage play that they do now, where Harry's an adult. Exactly. Part 3 is kind of like that stage play, where like it's not that satisfying, but it's a kind of a logical conclusion to where the story would go.
And it's definitely. I mean, it took him 8 years to write it. which is unsurprising. I mean, I guess if you break it out, it's 100 pages a year. But this is definitely, it's dense and it's researched and I think that's why I think both of us are saying that the first two parts feel like it took 8 years to write it. And It feels like maybe he at a month of creative effort at the end wrote 3. We're just like, this is great. I'm going to write this thing. And it wasn't didn't have that same gravitas.
And I feel like maybe we're not giving it enough credit, but I feel like the end of the story, the very end is kind of like it's still kind of like a to be continued. Yeah. That we saw this one snapshot of, I don't know, a month in this 5,000 year, forward future. And there's not a conclusion. Like one side doesn't wipe out the other side.
No.
And we're done. Or,
exactly.
we don't learn to live in peace and we're done.
Yeah.
It's just like these guys have allies and these guys have allies and this struggle will continue forever ad infinitum.
Yeah. And Stephenson is, since he tends to write rooted in like techno-fiction and hard sci-fi and everything else, he doesn't usually put a very nice bow on things because he addresses shit that doesn't have an easy, cheap answer. So to some level, I guess that's to be expected. And we should both reiterate, we both really love this book. So any of our criticisms are in the same way that our 4-hour dismantling of The Force Awakens really could have been a 30-second, oh my God, it was so good.
Yeah.
We could have just left it there. So
I did really like the book. And I do think if you pressed me on it, I don't think I could give you a more satisfying ending than what we got. I really don't know if there is one. He didn't really. I just
assume that if Neal gave us that, he could give us more. And I demand it. In fact,
I want part 4.
Yeah, there's nothing I can say like, oh yeah, you know what I do? I do A, B, and C, and that would have done something. No, there isn't a good answer.
No, and I think one of the reasons why you can be critical of part 3 is because you love part 1 and 2 so much. And that even part 3 was insanely interesting, and I felt like I wanted to live in that world for a little while.
Yes. That's my biggest complaint. I want more of that.
Yeah, and when you get to an author like a Neal Stephenson, he's not one to write sequels, so you don't know if you'll ever come back to this world.
I don't think so, and I part of me is really okay with that. Because if that's what I get, then that's what I get. And this is a book that's definitely going to stand up to multiple readings. At 880 pages, it's not going to be like a twice a year kind of a thing. But in a couple of years, I'm going to come back and revisit this and enjoy it probably even more than I did the first time. So
I do think that like you mentioned, the audiobook lends to that. Or like I could listen to the audiobook again. And if I don't have to catch every detail because I've read it once before, the audiobook becomes even more enjoyable, I think.
Yeah. So I think what we're saying is that if you got 880 pages worth of time, sometime there are a lot worse ways to spend it than with Seveneves.
Or even if you have like 600 pages worth of audiobook time and you put it on 1.25 speed, just go for it. It's totally worth it.
It definitely is. So I think that what I'd love to hear is what other people have thoughts on. If you felt the same way we did about part 3, if you were as enamored with parts 1 and 2 as we were, and if you want to start a petition for someone to force Neal Stephenson to write me more of part 3, I will sign it, is what I'm saying. All you have to do is just hit us up on Twitter at PopNerdery, and I'll take the details from there.
There we go.
So with that, we've got some recommendations coming up here, and there probably won't just be both of us repeating that you should read Seveneves. So I would, if I were you, stick around.
Today's show is brought to you by Audible. Go to popnerdery.com/audible and sign up for a free trial to support the show and get hours of entertainment.
Audible is perfect for people who don't like to read words and instead want to hear words.
Exactly, Toph. With your Audible free trial, you get 2 free audiobooks to start. When the trial ends, you get 1 audiobook a month for $14.95 a month. You also receive 30% off the price of every additional audiobook that you purchase. You can cancel at any time, and unlike Netflix, you get to keep your books even when you cancel.
That sounds like a better deal than the time that cop caught me listening to 50 Shades of Grey that I got from Audible and let me off with a warning as soon as I promised to put my pants back on.
That's right, listeners. Go to popnerdery.com/audible to sign up for your free trial and then tell your friends. That way they can share in your audiobook goodness. Welcome back. It's time for our recommendations. Luckily, you guys have stuck around this long. You're going to get some fantastic stuff to put into your lives. So I'm going to go be very gracious and let Topher go first. Topher, what recommendation do you have for me this week?
I got more books for you to put in your face.
Oh, shit.
You never should have let this genie out of the bottle.
You should. Yeah, I really shouldn't.
Now it's books. But it's a book you're going to love. It is the Star Wars Year by Year Visual Chronicle.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, I just picked this up for my coffee table, mostly because as I was flipping around on Amazon and my son was there, he was like, Star Wars books, why don't we have that one? And I was like, you are right. Why don't we have this one? This is a coffee table size, textbook size, delicious hardcover book that honestly I ordered it without really knowing what it was. And when it arrived, I was fascinated. It is a year by year chronology of what was happening within popular culture throughout the Star Wars saga.
Okay.
So it paints a picture of the landscape like before when A New Hope came out, like what other movies were going on, like what was that like, what was the premiere like? It's really less about Star Wars itself, although it's definitely obviously heavy on Star Wars, but it's really a kind of a history of the entire time span in pop culture as Star Wars comes out, begins to, I was going to say infect, and that's not the word I was really looking for, unless we're talking about,
it kind of fit.
The prequels, then it's an infection.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's really year by year, month by month, and has everything around the influences, the creation, pulling like what movies Lucas pulled inspiration and things from. It's super fascinating. It's not something that I'd seen done before. It's gorgeous. It's large. It sits on my coffee table now, and my child randomly flips it open and points at Wookiees. And that, I mean, no, that's not an endorsement. I don't know what it is.
Who wrote this one?
It is by Ryder Wyndham, Daniel Wallace, and Pablo Hidalgo.
Pablo Hidalgo.
Which might be my new favorite name.
I like that. Is it, I'm sure as a coffee table book, it's full of lush photography and illustrations.
It's laid out really nicely. The whole thing is pretty. It's got photographs from set, from the premieres. It's got concept art. It's got, because in between after the release, then it goes into the next movie's pre-production and that kind of stuff gets entered into it. The whole thing I found was incredibly fascinating. So yeah, Star Wars Year by Year, a visual chronicle. I think it's DK Publishing. I think that's who does most of those large format Star Wars books. Yeah,
I have a number of DK Publishing large format books on my shelf here.
Yeah, they're quality. And the thing that I like, it gives not equal time, but it definitely points out a lot of the novels, toys, books, video games, kind of all the tie-ins that went along with that stuff as well. So it's cool to see the progression of those things, not just the movies.
That's awesome.
So yeah, get it, put it on your table, show off your nerd.
Very fantastic recommendation. Thank you, sir. My recommendation this week is a podcast. I typically try to recommend things that are not podcasts that will take away your time from listening to our show. But this one was too good and too in my and your wheelhouse to not recommend it. So my recommendation is a new podcast. It's only on episode 4 right now, so you can go back and listen to all of them without much time commitment, called Science Versus.
Ooh.
Yes, Science Versus. It is hosted hosted by an Australian woman named Wendy Zuckerman. She has a delightful Australian accent that you get to listen to throughout every episode, and it is produced in the U.S., but there are a number of kind of Australian influences. So I've listened to 3 of the 4 episodes since it has started, and 2 of the 4 are they kind of tackle gun control in the U.S. and they tackle it not from a feeling standpoint, they tackle it from a fact standpoint. I learned a ton, and I'm somebody who I like to think of myself as well informed on the issue of gun control. I have thoughts about gun control, and I learned things and changed my opinions based on some things that I heard, in this podcast, which is not something that's easy to do. When you have political leanings one way or the other, a lot of times you just want to hear confirmation bias, right? You want to hear things that confirm the way that you already feel. And the way that they tackle this podcast is that they pit science against feelings. They pit facts against everything. And that appeals to me personally. I know it would appeal to you as well. 100. But it really helps when you're talking about, hot button issues like gun control, or one of them is on attachment parenting. And the other one, so there was a two-parter on guns. One was on attachment parenting, and the other one was about fracking. So they talk about these issues, and they say, yes, we understand that there's a political argument to be made this way or that way, or these interests that support these things this way or that way, but we're going to talk about the claims that are made and whether or not science supports them.
Nice.
And that's it. So they come to, they say, here's a thing that we're going to test, and we're going to look at all available scientific research. Here's what it states, and here are some experts, and they try to make it funny and add levity and, different things to different situations. And they come to conclusions at the end of the episode. They say, bullet point number 1, we decided to test this. The science says this, so it's true or it's false, or this is the way that science comes down on this particular subject. It is refreshing that somebody can acknowledge, this is politically polarizing, but we are going to look at facts and nothing but facts. And we're going to try and teach you a couple of things, so that way the next time you're, in an argument with your uncle at Thanksgiving, you can speak from a place of knowledge as opposed to a place of feeling.
What a novel concept!
So I thought you would like that.
Yeah.
So it is Science Versus. It's produced by a company called Gimlet Media, but you can find it on iTunes. Just Science VS. And that's what you search on iTunes. Yep. So those are our recommendations for this evening, and that brings us to the end of tonight's show. Thank you for listening. As a reminder, you can join the conversation typically on Twitter. That's where you can find us at PopNerdery. I am at Dave Foltz. If you want to hear me talk about mostly, Cubs baseball and politics, but I will engage you on any nerd topic of the day. You can follow Topher at
The Hospital Ball.
Hospital Ball.
Where I'm shouting about my favorite sports teams, likely making fun of yours. Yeah, you can just come over there and yell at me. That's fine.
I will and do and enjoy it greatly. Also, please rate and review and subscribe to the show on iTunes. It really helps with rankings. It helps people to discover the show. So it would be a big help. So that is the show for tonight. And Topher, I'd like to say I love you, good sir, and finger guns.
Finger guns.
We did it. We did it.
And we finally got to talk about Seveneves.
Hey-o!